So, here's the theory, and I'm going to make this as understandable as possible, okay? So, discourse, Foucault is like the daddy of discourse, basically. He's like the building blocks of the theory. So, for Foucault, discourse is a group of statements which provide a language for talking about, or a way of representing the knowledge about, a particular topic at a particular historical moment. I'm going to share these slides, by the way, so you don't need to worry so much about writing everything down. So, what do we mean by a group of statements? Well, those group of statements in Melissa's article are looking for ideas about instrumentalism and internationalism in the same place. And she looks at statements, whether they are sentences or whatever, and how they're grouped together to provide a language, to provide a way of communicating meaning for talking about a particular idea at a particular point in time. And that particular historical moment is key, because the way that people write about Britain is best has a completely different social meaning in the year 2006 than it does in the year 2019. So discourse is about production of knowledge through language. Now I remember thinking, knowledge production, oh my god, what the hell is that? All it means is kind of the way that meaning is made and the way that meaning is shared. All of that stuff is the production of knowledge. Okay, here's another thing, that since all social practices entail meanings, and meanings shape and influence what we do, all of our practices have a discursive aspect. Okay, so let's break this down. By social practices means literally everything that we do. So whether that is sitting and listening in class, that's a social practice. Whether it's me standing and teaching, that's a social practice. Whether it's sitting at home and watching The Circle, that's a social practice. Or whether it's going to McDonald's and Instagramming your mate eating a burger in a really messy way. They're all social practices because you're sharing ideas and meanings about a particular moment with different people, and everyone will read those meanings, those pictures, those ideas in slightly different ways. But more than that, they all shape and influence the way that we do things, right? So if people hadn't started Instagramming their food, no one would be Instagramming their food. So it's only because something's happened before that things have a meaning in which you communicate meaning. That's what our social practices mean, and that's the discursive aspect of them. So, bringing it back to the arts. In other words, talking about the arts at this moment in time requires a particular way of communicating that's called discourse. So what we know about the arts, our knowledge, is the understanding that's produced already. So, for example, I can't talk to my dad about art because he doesn't understand it. And I don't mean he doesn't understand it, I mean he literally has no idea. So you'd be speaking a bunch of long words at him into a vacuum. His understanding of art just happens to be the posters I had on my wall when I was a teenager. That's it. So I'm not communicating meaning when I'm communicating with him, because he hasn't wanted to kind of understand it in the first place. It hasn't been part of his everyday life, and his meaning hasn't really been shaped by the arts as a discourse. Okay. So language is only one social practice, and all social practice has meanings, whether it's Instagramming or whether it's putting posters on your wall about the fact that you really like the Raphaelite art as a teenager. So these meanings shape and influence what we do. What we mean by that is, one really crude reading of looking back on Melissa Nisbet's article, where you look at a bunch of people going on about how Britain is best. A really crude reading of that might be that influenced where we are now today. I mean, I don't think you could argue that there's a direct causation, that just because the British Council wrote a particular report in 2003, Brexit happened, but they're all part of a discourse where meaning is shared, and it's okay to keep asserting yourself as best and separate from other people. Okay, so discourse, it's not purely linguistic, it's about our actions, it's about our signs, it's about hidden communications. It's all about language and language as practice. And this idea is, the reason that this idea comes up over and over again is because for so long, when people talked about how we communicate with each other, like right at the beginning of psychology, there was this traditional distinction between what people said as something that was quite conscious and controlled, and then what people do, which is unconscious. And like this whole part of theory that Foucault's part of is saying that that's absolute rubbish. They all reinforce themselves. It's all about sharing meaning. So discourse constructs the topic just literally means that you need to speak about a particular idea into an arena, into a social norm that understands it. Like me and my dad. Love how we refer to me and my dad. He's never eaten an avocado. Discourse defines and produces the objects of our knowledge. So you can only talk about the arts and health if you have some idea of what art is in the first place and what health is in the first place. Even though those are completely contested terms that we can talk about for a whole year just by themselves, as I've done, boringly, these, we at least have an idea of what health is and what art is, so we can speak to each other about these ideas. Discourse governs the way that a topic can be meaningfully talked about. So, the way that we communicate about our food now constructs the way that we continue to talk about it. But there needed to be a shift from the idea that, only posh people in The Guardian got to review restaurants to the fact that we all get to kind of with democracy, share our own images of food, take control. And it opens how ideas are put into practice and used to regulate the conduct of others. And as we're about to find out, the Victorians were really keen on this idea of instrumentalism, where they put ideas out there in terms of what is a moral life, and they used art to do this in the hope that it would regulate the conduct of others. They wanted to civilise the working class, and they thought if they did so, they'd remove all illicit sex, drinking, prostitution, literally all the bad stuff. So, last slide, promise. For Foucault, given that we only have knowledge of things if they have meaning for us in the first place, it is discourse, not the things in themselves which produce knowledge. So, the bowl of fruit only has meaning as a work of art if that bowl of fruit is sitting in a context that makes it art, right? Subjects like the social benefits of the art can only exist meaningfully within discourses about them. So if we didn't have this historical intellectual tradition of believing that the arts were good for us, which comes from Aristotle and Plato at the beginning, then it wouldn't make sense. The idea wouldn't make sense. But actually what this discourse does is reinforce stuff that already makes sense to us a lot of the time. So, therefore, in conclusion, the way knowledge about the arts is constructed is in discourse. Do we all agree with that now? I've taken you through it. Does that make sense, mainly? Yeah, not bad. So, for example, this is another example, right? Here we have a wall, we have some grass, we have Banksy's kind of taken marks on the wall, transcribed them into something else, and then he's written something. There's loads and loads of layers and meaning, but this wouldn't mean anything to someone from outside a culture in which Banksy adapting the wall and adapting this language had meaning, right? So take this society, someone who didn't really understand the cultural context in which this was happening would be like, what does that mean? So one extension of the argument is that the arts can only have social benefit if people have been discussing the social benefit of the arts in order to create a reality in which that meaning is a possibility. That's like the most abstract kind of pushing of the idea. So, coming away from Foucault, and everyone can breathe a sigh of relief, the term discourse is used to refer to all forms of talk and texts, where there is naturally occurring conversations, like old ladies at the bus stop, interview material, i.e. when you come to do your dissertations, you might interview people and you might analyse what they say in a way that you would analyse some of this stuff, or written text of any kind, and that's Gill's definition. Her definition does not account for the vast array of visual material that we see daily. And we're bombarded with it. And some of it, we all know that the cream inside the jar is supposed to make us younger, but most of us reading, well, obviously that's an ancient advert, but most of us looking at that advert are able to have a critical reading of what it's telling us, right? We don't believe that the cream in the jar is really going to make us younger. We don't really believe that 8 out of 10 cats think this is the best cat food on the market. There was a split in the nation about how many people believed that £350 million additional would go to the NHS instead of the EU. And also, this is important because these ideas endure not only in the discourse of the people who are like on one side of an argument, but they endure on the other side as well, right? So fake news is now a term that's used on the right and the left, but it started off having a very specific meaning in a specific context. But we're now able to look at all of these adverts and these political statements with a critical eye. And that's what discourse analysis is. It's just applying it to, in your case, a policy document, rather than the stuff that you're doing constantly, all the time. You're constantly doing discourse analysis. So all we're doing is taking something that's quite an innate skill, and we're applying it through close reading and common sense. So Rosgill talks about close reading and careful reading, and you do need to be careful. But Rosgill's language is quite protective of discourse analysis as a craft. And I would argue that that's because she is interested in craft as a discipline. So she's interested in the craft of writing, she's interested in the craft of taking it apart. And she kind of ring fences things. Whereas what I want to try and say is, well, that's fine if you're an academic who's got 35 years experience. However, you know, we are all doing discourse analysis all the time, and actually all it requires is what to us is common sense.